Hausa majitada. Gitanum kunim ginawasa. Ninasa sagajue gaboeque. Chawasa. Widiomakea gamaskoa kokag. Indonche ba ninasa. Undishamakea Ojibwe winishna bewa king. Egayegoni mi gwechuenima guinawasa gakanuenima goya no masa mayagin shina bewa king. Omasa Pueblo a king. Egayegoni mi gwechuenima winawasa gaga gwejimigoyan. Chinipi dushin chinipi gagi guduan omasa. A Jinaway singa gagigid omasa. Gadashin dan mieshi in Wewetuan, a meje kino magoan, Jinian Wayan, Jinian Shnabe Moyan Omasa. I am Leslie Harper. I am a Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe enrolled member. What is left of our homelands in Minnesota, I'm Ojibwe. Here's a map of Minnesota. That is our Ishkuniganan, our reservations of Minnesota, and that word Ishkunigan really means what remains, the leftovers, after all of our land cessions and deals with the American government that came through. I like to say that Leech Lake is the heart of Ojibwe country in Minnesota. I don't have a pointer, but we won't need one after this. Right in the center up there, that green blob in the very center up there. A little bit to the west is White Earth. North is Red Lake, where some of our other visitors and speakers from yesterday and the day before come from. So those green ones, there's 7 Ojibwe reservations in Minnesota, and there are 4 Dakota nations down in the southern part. And you know, talk about getting a raw deal. We can barely see those specks of land too. This was some tough stuff for our people to go through. But this is kind of a picture of where our homelands are at in the state of Minnesota. But you know, do you guys remember the good old days, like 1491? I mean, like 1500s, like before all this happened, you know? Like the good old days when everybody talked Indian to each other, you know? There's a lot of this stuff. And so some of you folks out there I know, and I've worked with some of you folks, and I've visited in some of your communities over the years. We've heard from a lot of the second language learners over the last few days who are, I'm super excited to see them coming up. They're a lot younger than I am. They're fresh and new and bright. I feel like I've been doing this forever. But it is true. Ine's easy to fool. I am a second language learner, and I've had a really great opportunity as well to visit with some really good first speakers of Ojibwe here, and I got to listen in a lot, and I've really, really appreciated that opportunity as well. It's getting harder and harder for us in our homelands here to find and to hear Ojibwe speakers. So, running back through the good old days, you know, we talked about our land cessions, we talked about the reductions of our land. Some of the better things that have ever happened, you know, the good old days in the 1970s when we had President Nixon around. People usually give me a really funny look when I say that. But this is when we started talking about self-determination here in America. And, you know, President Nixon, as part of his administration, was like, hey, you know, we got to do better by Indian people here. The time has come to break decisively with the past, create a new era. Indians determine their future. Indians determine their decisions. And so his administration started doing some stuff. They reversed termination policy. In 1972, the US Congress passed the Indian Education Act. If there are 10 or more Native students in a public school district eligible to they were then eligible to receive supplemental funding. This is where our phrase, the unique linguistic and cultural needs of Native American students, comes from. And this wasn't like a bunch of lawmakers in DC just making this up and saying we're going to be benevolent to Native students and Native communities. This was our people were picking up and taking those steps down the self-determination road, and our folks were describing this language and getting this written into laws. So this is where the U.S. Ed Law supporting Indian education came from. It developed the Office of Indian Education at the Education Department. So good times in the good old days. 1975, the Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act finally passed. And this, granted self-governance to tribes here in the U.S. We were now authorized to contract directly with the federal agencies to operate our programs. They didn't have to go through the state. Instead of going through, the Bureau administrating it, we could take it on as our individual tribes, do our health programs, our educational programs, and, so these are some good steps going on. I mention these good old days, because this is the era I was born in. And some of these speakers the last few days were like, I was born in the 90s. This is the era I was born in. This stuff was happening, and our communities were trying to figure out on the ground how to implement it. So it's one thing for folks out in Washington, D.C. to say, here's a law. It's one thing for folks at the state capitol to say, here's the law. They put some words on some paper and someone signs it, but really, you have to do a lot to get it rolling and to get it implemented. So in our reservation communities that are made up of, we have like 10,000 people in our tribe. There's probably about 4,000 to 5,000 that live on or near reservation, and then the rest of our folks are spread out. They're in urban areas, they're spread out across the US. So for folks to say, all right, we're actually going to take control of our education systems. We're actually going to take control of our healthcare systems. That's a lot of work. It's a lot of capacity to build and, to figure out how to do that. So our community was excited to do this, and, we're trying to figure it out. I was a kid. I was a little toddler running around while my parents and my aunties and uncles and grandmas and grandpas were doing this, organizing and learning and reading about it. So I say that just as a way of introduction. This is where I came from, this idea that we can do this. We can figure this out in a way that makes sense to our Ojibwe community, to our localized community, and we can implement this. These are ideas born out of treaty obligations from the US to us, but also this is our people. We're saying, get out of the way. We know how to run our systems. So this is how I was raised to look at life, in a really, really kind of Ojibwe way. If we don't have something, we'll make it, I was asked to come in and talk about being a second language learner. Who's texting me while I'm speaking? Never mind, that's just my timer. I had some typical language learner opportunities throughout my life. In high school, I took Spanish as a world language course. We did, through our Indian Education Act, we did have a lot of Ojibwe language classes in our elementary schools and high schools, but they were electives. So they didn't count for your credits for, it used to be foreign languages, now everybody calls them world languages. Back in the old days, when I was in high school, they were foreign languages. We didn't get, our credits for Ojibwe. So a lot of us went to the classes and took them, but we also had to take another foreign language. I took a couple of years of Spanish. After high school, I actually lived far from home in Minneapolis and was a little bit lonesome for everyone at home, so I started hanging out at Ojibwe language tables, these weekly social gatherings where some students from the university and a couple of university Ojibwe language professors would hang out and have a potluck dinner and do some really simple language lessons. And I was like, hey, there's Indians there, they're my age, and they're talking Ojibwe, let's do it. Hanging out with them, I was not a university student, but this was kind of a university kind of push of a project that moved out into the community and gathered more community members. They invited me in, and they were like, go ahead, come sit in on my classes at university. You can audit my course, or you can just walk in the door. You don't even have to sign up, you know. So I took some courses, Ojibwe language courses at University of Minnesota Twin Cities, and I took what I could. And then I was like, man, this is kind of cool to actually, you know, be thinking about Ojibwe language. And I got a little farther into it. Did a lot of transcription to further my language learning. And I was like, all right, this is cool, but, you know, all of my aunties and grandmas back home can really talk Ojibwe, and instead of like just sitting here listening to transcriptions, recordings, or, you know, just hanging out for an hour once a week, you know, I can go home and like hang out with Ojibwe speakers. So I moved home. As a language learner, oh man, you guys, I forgot to tell you before I started, like, buckle up, put on your seatbelts, like, pack your parachutes in case you got to escape, because, like, this trail goes all over the place. I was invited in to talk about being a second language learner, and Ine was like, talk about your experience. And I was like, Ine, it's been like 25 years. There's a lot happening. And she's like, oh, yeah, that'll be great. And so you guys, hang on. This is going to go in a lot of places. In the early days, we had some younger folks. By younger folks, I say that like a handful of us who were working really hard to learn to speak Ojibwe. We were all English speakers, but we wanted to learn our language. And then we would pester and pester and pester all the old people in our community. And then we got this great idea to pull together other language learners throughout Minnesota and Wisconsin. So we started having a language conference, which was super cool. 3 days, super inspiring, got all our tribes together. And then everybody said, what do we do the other, 350 days of the year? What do we do? What can we do to keep maintaining this great feeling about Ojibwe language? A 3-day conference annually isn't quite, doing it. So one of our conference funders, it was funded by a lot of the tribes in Minnesota and Wisconsin, but also there was some philanthropic support. The Grotto Foundation had a 15-year initiative, a Native Languages Revitalization Initiative, where they put hard dollars into a 15-year initiative. For a long time, they were the only philanthropic organization, in this country that was fully dedicated to supporting Native languages revitalization. They did some amazing work to set this stuff up. They brought in some experts to our conferences, as well as helping us, fund the places. Some of those folks we got to meet were Daryl Kipp of the Blackfeet Nation. And they actually sponsored a trip for us out to visit the Pagan Institute as well. But having Daryl come in and be a keynote speaker at our conference was really inspirational for a lot of folks. He's super cool, super great, super encouraging. And, that was a really good connection. Another year, the Grotto Foundation brought in Leanne Hinton and to speak about some work that they were doing with ILIS in California. And Leanne said, hey, I'm working on this book. We're not quite at publication, but I have a draft copy of it here. I'll share it with you. You can copy it, and you can share it with your language learning community. When our book comes out, you should actually buy it. It helps the languages in California, but I mean, you can have this. And she stayed and did a training for Master Apprentice programs. And so we got the draft copy, the pre-pub copy of her book on that, how to keep your languages alive, like the Master Apprentice manual. And we got some training with her. So that was super cool as well. We got new introductions, new resources, new allies, new mentors to help us figure out what does language revitalization in Native communities look like. And it looks like all sorts of shapes and forms, right? Along with those connections and making wider and broader connections and learning more, we at home also got new responsibilities, right? Because your relationships go two ways. We now got called in to advocate some more for the Esther Martinez Initiative legislation passage. So probably we got roped in probably around 1998 or 1999. EMI didn't pass until 2006. So we were working with these folks, with a lot of you folks out in this room as well, have written the testimonies and have gone to Washington, D.C. and have sent in the support for that over a many-year process. This is kind of the group that we got pulled into, was working on policy on a larger level, because the Esther Martinez legislation would recognize language survival schools, language nests, language learning opportunities, and would provide federal funding for this. So that finally passed in 2006. We started some Master Apprentice projects at home after that in the very early 2000s. We designed them so that we would be working one-on-one with a second language learner with a master speaker for 20 hours a week, one-on-one on language learning. Very directed, very intent. And then this was a job for both parties. The masters and the apprentices got paid as a job. The other 20 hours of a 40-hour work week for the apprentice was there was transcription work, there were other interviews, elicitation projects, there was language table curriculum development, making up activities, had to go and do language tables. In Leech Lake, we have 14 communities spread out around our reservation, so there's a lot of places where we could go and do community language classes. So I was able to be an apprentice. I was hired as an apprentice in one of these programs, and I did about 1,200 hours in a little over a year's time of the Master Apprentice one-on-one language learning, and probably like 500 hours of different kinds of transcriptions, both of old recordings, but also contemporary recordings that we were doing at the time, along with tons of cool interviews and stuff with elders in our community. Benefits of Master Apprentice. This was where I really learned a lot. I really learned a lot about speaking, a lot about communicating. I learned a lot more vocabulary. In the classes I had previously taken at the university, like the mechanics-based classes, man, I could not get that stuff. You could tell me it over and over and over and over and over, and I know a few basic grammar patterns, but for me, my brain, it doesn't click until I'm in the situation and speaking it and hearing it, So living our lives in Ojibwe for 20 hours a week, for real life, real time, real context, really helped my own language learning at that point in time. So I'm forever grateful for that opportunity, and I preach it to everyone. This is an opportunity If we can build this in, I always want to share it with pre-service teaching. If somebody's going into that field, it should be into induction periods for pre-service teachers. We should be considering a year's worth of this kind of language learning time as an induction period, just as we do other forms of pre-service teacher training. It's just an amazing way to learn. And as we've heard from everyone, an immersion method. I probably came out at an intermediate mid-level of speaking by that point in time. My son was a toddler, little guy, and he hung out with us, so he also got the benefits of hanging around an Ojibwe-speaking grandma. And it was at this point in time, we made a conscious decision to raise our son in Ojibwe. I mean, when he was born, that was our conscious decision as well. And then we divorced, his dad and I, but we continued to hang out and co-parent. He had total 100% Ojibwe language at his dad's house. His dad had been working on his language for probably a decade and a half before I even was starting, So he was he was an advanced level speaker, second language learner, and their house has remained 100% Ojibwe. Mine is probably 50% Ojibwe and English in my house and with my extended family. Because my siblings, my mom and dad, they don't talk Ojibwe, and we all pretty much raised my son together. But this isn't even humble bragging. This is outright bragging. My son's first language is Ojibwe. Shaka. Yeah. That's really rare in our communities. When we've done surveys of speakers, when we've done census of speakers, we probably have 5 in the last 50 years. People who speak Ojibwe as their first language and have maintained it throughout their lives. We have a lot more who learned Ojibwe at home and then left it behind for English when they got to compulsory school age. So that's the tragedy, that's the hurt, that's the hard part of our language. But my son has managed to maintain it. He's now 19. He's bilingual. He's bilingual Ojibwe English speaker, and he identifies as an Ojibwe speaker if he's ever called on to introduce himself or anything. So pretty proud of that. Basic strategies for Master Apprentice projects. We've heard a lot of this over the last couple of days. We had to create an artificial environment for Ojibwe to thrive because obviously it wasn't happening at home. So it feels kind of funky when you first start, right? It's clunky. The master's looking at the learner and saying, why don't you understand me? Why am I talking? You don't understand me. I should just talk in English to you. Breathe through it. There are strategies, like we said, there's tons of strategies and activities and games that can be used to keep the language going. We were doing in-home daily living together. I had a wonderful 71-year-old lady who hung out with me. She was also raising a granddaughter of hers who is a couple of years older than my boy. So her granddaughter also got to learn a lot of Ojibwe language as well. So she was doubtful and apprehensive at first. She didn't think I'd really learn how to speak because as clunky and as stumbling as I am today, I was even worse then. But we eventually inspired others to speak Ojibwe in the community. I say that like it was really simple. It happened. It happened slowly and intently. But the learner's got to be on it. You have to be so intent. You have to be so conscious about it. We don't pin a lot on the master in the way that we've trained our teams in our area. We say, your job is to speak. Your coordinator will come in and help work with you guys like weekly or so. Just hang in there. We'll help you with guides. We'll help you with tips. But really the learner, we put a lot of the weight on the learner to maintain the shape of the lessons and the scope of the lessons. It is weird making that artificial place. It's this weird metacognitive thing where you're like thinking about it all the time, and it's really weird to deconstruct all of your activities, and it just seems really clunky in the beginning. But once you get into it, you build those habits. It's just building new habits. It's breaking the old English habits. Some of the things I had to consciously think about, like, one, I'm trying to listen to what this lady's saying in Ojibwe, and then I'd be like, she just said, he's sitting down there. Now I have to think about how to extend that verb. How would I say they all are sitting down there? In my mind, I'm doing this. And I'm like, how would I say we sat down there but not you? And now I got to ask her, Auntie, we all sat there but not you. And, Ojibwe mo en daga, gego shaganashimukin, don't talk English. So I would have to actively think of this, okay, I got to extend these verb patterns. How do I get her to do this? And, it's exhausting. But then, after a couple of months, she got into the habit of doing it. I didn't have to ask her anymore. We would be doing an activity, and she'd say, okay, now you peel this off from here, and if you had some kids here, and she'd be saying this in Ojibwe, if you had some kids here, you'd tell them all this way. Here's how you all do it, And I was like, cool. So she got into it, and it just became a habit. It takes a lot of trust. Some of the outcomes, I don't know if you can even read this. It's really small print. And I don't know why I put challenges on that side and positives on this side. If you read this way, who cares about the challenges? Why would I put challenges first? Let's talk about the positives. Our master speaker had someone to talk Ojibwe with again. Sometimes our master speakers, their spouse had passed away, or maybe their siblings were gone. They were the last of their siblings. And we heard that multiple times over from our master speakers. I haven't had anyone to talk Indian with in quite a few years. So this was fulfilling to them in that way. They gained confidence in their abilities in the community. We had an increase in Ojibwe spoken in our communities. I learned to speak Ojibwe better. My son learned to talk Ojibwe. All right, fine, the challenges. And we've heard this the last couple of days too. People in our community also like to tell us that speaking Ojibwe is for nothing. There's no benefit to it. They like to tell us that. That's rough to hear for a while. I was going to the tribal college, at Leech Lake Tribal College, and one of our instructors there, who is a tribal member, and was teaching a tribal law and governance class, outright mocked me for talking Ojibwe to my son and raising my son in Ojibwe. This man is monolingual English speaker. I asked him, do you speak any other languages? And he said, no. I had to take some Spanish in college, but I don't remember any of it. And I said, oh. But he mocked me, and he said, what are you going to do? Who's your kid ever going to talk to? Who's your kid ever going to marry? What are you going to do? And he laughed. And this was in front of a class, and I was like, wow, guy, I don't know who hurt you, But that really struck me that it was this confrontational to someone that I would be raising my child. And I was like, no, my kid's going to be multilingual, My kid's going to learn a lot of languages, but right now we're really prioritizing Ojibwe. This is one time we were at the grocery store. We were in the parking lot. And again, my little guy, we had car seats, and I was I had unhooked it, and then I was standing outside the car waiting for him to climb down, and I said, wait, Gus, hurry up. wait, kid. Da being the gamin. And this guy says, hey, are you okay? And I was like, what? And he's like, what are you talking that about? Why are you talking that for? Are you okay? Something wrong? And I was like, nothing's wrong. I'm talking Ojibwe. Like, it should not be crazy. Something should not be wrong. I don't know. It's just, we're in this weird era, right? We're in this weird time where it's just really confrontational. We've had the message for several decades that our language is not useful, that our language is of no economic benefit, that our language is of no cognitive benefit. It was an interesting time to be trying to speak Ojibwe again. But what are some of the things that we know? We know that our grandmas and grandpas' dreams and thoughts and humor come out best in our first language. And so, it's kind of like we're kind of responsible to learn it if we want to think about being able to really communicate with our elders in our communities. Ojibwe mo and onudoana nino manidon. The manidug, a very common phrase was that the manidug only talk Indian. So if we want to have our spiritual connections, we need to know our languages. One of our elders, one of our uncles and teachers in the community, Mason Anaquad, said this, and after his grandson went to the public school, compulsory education, by the age of 7, everyone in Minnesota has to be enrolled in a school. After their boy started at kindergarten, this family has a gift for singing, for making songs and for singing, and they had their little boy, and he was amazing. He still is. He's an amazing singer, but there was a point after he started the public school where he stopped singing, and that just broke my heart when Mason Anaquad said that, our boy doesn't sing anymore ever since he went to that place. We don't think that's such a great place for that. We really need somewhere, we really need to support this. Along with comments like that, with people really looking at what's happening in the public schools, and then with my boy starting to get older, and we were like, man, is this what happens when you send kids to school? And then visiting with our friends at Pygon Institute and other immersion schools, we were like, hey, let's start an immersion school. And y'all know how easy that is. Piece of cake. There were pieces and parts to put together with this, and there are really important pieces that I'll talk about. We looked around in the community, and coming from the idea of the interconnectedness of our relationships, our kinship, our clans, we also said, where are we placed in our community? What are our responsibilities? Who else has responsibilities? Because, one person alone cannot do this. 2 people alone cannot lift up a program like this, cannot create an institution like this. We said we need to really dive into what does it mean in our Ojibwe community? What do we look like? Who's got strengths in different areas? So we said, who do we need at the table? Who are our fire keepers? Who are our fire starters? Those are your initiators of your stakeholders. There are boards who vote on your project, and then you may never see them again, but they were necessary in the process, right? And then there's maintainers, there's the fire keepers, the people who implement it and keep it going. So we were doing all of these community development exercises, but also looking at them through the lens of Ojibweity. So again, just leaning a lot on those same things we've been doing for decades in self-determination. Where do we fit in the operation systems of our communities? We discussed and decided upon some critical elements of culture-based education that we wanted to see implemented. So again, this is families. We called out to like, hey, families, if you have a child who's going to be school age, you know, in the next year or two, and you love our language, come on out. We looked for teachers of our language. We looked for speakers of our language. We brought a lot of folks together. And we did a lot of different planning. Part of it was agreeing on these elements of culture-based education, that our site would use our Indigenous language. That's a critical element. That the pedagogy, the teaching strategies would be congruent with what looks like Leech Lake Ojibwe life, as well as what looks like contemporary Leech Lake Ojibwe life. What does that mean to extend that and to bring it into today's world? Curriculum, that looks like the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe communities. Patterns of participation in leadership and decision making. What does that look like? What does leadership and decision making look like in Ojibwe communities? Does it look like an IRA constitutional government? Does it look like Robert's Rules of Order? You know, do you have to have a quorum at everything? Or are we going to talk about leadership and decision making from a different perspective and from our own? Do we remember what that looks like? Do we have a way to access that knowledge? And then we also said that one of the critical elements of CBE is culture-based methods of assessing student performance in the language of instruction. So, what do assessments look like? How do you know a student knows something? And so we did all of these like interviews and held elders roundtables, and we did these projects where we would ask these questions and we would dig out this information from the folks in our community. So again, very intent process to figure this stuff out and to put it into place. We didn't just let it happen. We didn't just translate from the state government's plan, from the State Department of Ed's plan. This was very intently created by our Leech Lake communities, framed in an Ojibwe way of knowing. And there were second language learners who would lead an elders roundtable. You'd have like 5 or 10 Ojibwe speakers gathered, and they would ask the questions, and we made sure we were asking in Ojibwe, so they would answer in Ojibwe, and we would record it. And then some of our newer apprentices would transcribe that both as a learning exercise, but then this became the basis for our curriculum. So, always tons of stuff to do for the second language learners. We started a language immersion school. 5 kindergarten students, grew a grade each year, added a new entry cohort. Simultaneously, we developed a parent program. And parents are required, 1, to volunteer at the school, so many hours a month. This resulted in about 1,000 hours a year of volunteer time to the school. That's like a half-time employee, you know? I mean, that's like how much capacity these new initiatives need. We had people, but we still needed more to be building all of this stuff and to be collecting it all. But here was a place for families to come in and access Ojibwe language. Just like we had to create these artificial spaces for master apprentice projects, home-based learning, community-based learning, we now had to build this artificial environment of a school site, you know, that is applying the medium of Ojibwe language as the language of instruction. But we were sure to build it from our point of view. So it was more empowering and liberating for our communities. Here's a graph of the level of Ojibwe as the language of instruction. The purple is the Shaganashimoan, and the other purple's Ojibwe. Okay, the big one, the light purple, is Ojibwe. So when they start in kindergarten, it's 100%, 100%, 100%, K1 and 2 grades. In third grade, we introduced English language arts class, but they still got all of their math, Ojibwe language arts, science, geography, all of that in Ojibwe. And so that was 10% of the day, 20%, 30%, and by the time they were in 6th and 7th grades, that was 60-40, 60% Ojibwe and 40% Shaganashimoan. We maintained Ojibwe language arts as a class, and we maintained English reading and English language arts as a separate class taught by someone who was not on our staff, who was not an Ojibwe speaker, so that our Ojibwe teachers would not ever have to speak English to the kids. That, again, is a very intense decision. So it requires a lot of staffing and a lot of wrangling and a lot of juggling and a lot of money. But this is our decision, and this is what we did. So, yeah, all social and academic content are taught in Ojibwe target language. It's an alternative choice track at our existing Bureau of Indian Ed school. And there's some cool pictures of kids, like that's the classroom, as well as that. I mean, we were outside as much as we were inside. It's pretty cool. It's a beautiful spot, and it's really awesome to have access to the land that's like right out the back door of the school building. Just to give you an idea of the oral proficiencies at that site, for the adults at our site, there are 4 advanced speakers, 2 intermediate high speakers, 1 intermediate mid, 2 novice high, right? And this is a snapshot in time. We had frequent turnovers in staffing, or we had frequent reshufflings, but this is a pretty representative shot of the oral proficiencies. So that's the adults in the setting. So you can see a pretty big range of speakers. For the students, we were like, well, we've never done this before, but let's set a goal. You know, okay, they're going to demonstrate an intermediate high level of Ojibwe and oral proficiency. What's their written proficiency going to be? Never done it before. We're going to conduct action research on this item, and we're going to go for it, you know. This is some of the stuff we had to work through and that we had to design along with curriculum and pedagogy. But I give you this to look at the different levels of proficiency and to think about what this kind of language learning site has. So out of that, there were there's 3 elder first speakers of Ojibwe. It's kindergarten through 6th grade. 3 elder first speakers of Ojibwe. They do multi-age classrooms because we have really small numbers of students still. So there's 3 classrooms, teaching teams of an elder first speaker and a second language learner, teacher. So you've got 2 people in the classroom. We've had opportunities to hire a curriculum specialist to document stuff. We've had a paraprofessional, and then teaching licenses. There were 7, so out of all of those staff, 7 K through 12 Ojibwe language and culture licenses. That's a uniquely Minnesotan teaching license. It's actually called American Indian History, Culture, and Language license, and it is tribally endorsed. Any one of the 11 tribes in Minnesota endorses that for a teacher license applicant, and then you send it to the Department of Ed, and the Department of Ed accepts it. They just put their stamp on it. I mean, we're not going through Pibbles the Professional Board of Teaching standards. These are tribally controlled standards. There were 7 of those teaching licenses at our language immersion site. There are 4 elementary ed, people who'd gone through traditional college prep teacher programs. And at one time we had one person who had a kindergarten through 8 Ojibwe language license. So they were licensed to teach specifically language as a subject. The students go out, we know that the students are going out to English medium high schools in the area. There are no Ojibwe language medium high schools. So, again, intently strategically looking at how do we build up our kids, knowing that they are going to move out into English medium sites. We have to be very strategic in what we're designing, what we're delivering, the pace at which we're doing this. But our goal at home for our people was these kids are going to succeed in any environment they find themselves in. Yeah, but how do the kids really do? Is a frequent question in our community. Well, I love to answer that. I really enjoy answering that question because it was built on our terms. We're going to measure it on our terms. So I told you we started that school in 2004. We're starting to see the longitudinal, long-term effects, benefits now. Our students are confident. Our students are kind. Our students understand their relationships in the community. Our students know who their clans are. They know who their relations are. Many of them understand their place in ceremony. One of our primary teachings is that it's our responsibility to make this world livable, and they live their lives in that way. How do the kids really do? That's how they do. Short-term and long-term, our students expect to hear Ojibwe. They're expecting. They expect to hear people speaking Ojibwe. They expect to be understood when they go around. A lot of the younger kids who are being brought up, they think that anybody who has white hair, talks Indian, and they're surprised when they find out that, these people don't speak Ojibwe, that they lost their language at some time. So then they're like, hey, well, do you remember this word? But we are renormalizing Ojibwe ideals. There have been protests of EnglishMedium assessment schedules because it's unfair to assess students in a language in which they are not learning. You think? If you were to commit that kind of aggression or violence on children to force them to take a test at 3rd grade in a language they'd never been taught in, you wouldn't be getting any valid or reliable data on how students are measuring content area subjects. So there has been an assertion of rights at times to opt out of the 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade assessments of content areas, but sometimes that's met with really punitive threats. So we constantly get pushbacks, and whether it's your own community members, whether it's the school boards, whether it's state boards of education or U.S. departments of education, people always want to threaten it. They just get scared, that how could you Indians possibly know how to measure your kids' knowledge in your own language? We just get doubted all the time. But it requires a lot of work also with the families of the students to bring them along and to help them understand what their kids are learning, how they're learning. The kids are getting much more intense content level stuff than the parents can get in a 1 or 2 night a week class. The kids are picking up the language much more quickly than their families. And sometimes the families are used to getting report cards and, reports from the school. So we have to do a lot of support with the families, with the folks who are raising the kids, and to maintain confidence in the setting. Yeah, how are they really doing? Successes are, there was successful student retention throughout the span of the school. There's an increase in the Ojibwe Moen proficiency of Leech Lake children. There's been an increase in first speaker engagement. Development projects have been awarded funding many years running. So that's like professional development, curriculum development, all sorts of cool stuff, literacy, oracy, rhetoric, that kind of stuff. There's another point of entry for Ojibwe language in our community where we were running out of places to hear Ojibwe language. Here is another access point. Here is somewhere that people in our community can go and share in our language. And yes, our students do achieve at and above the levels of their English monolingual peers by the 8th grade. They are at and above the level of their English monolingual peers. If anybody cares on those tests of English content areas, which was our intent all along, to raise functionally bilingual children, at a minimum bilingual, who would, by high school, meet or exceed the levels of their English monolingual peers. Challenges are always teacher training. Never enough people, you know. There's this whole licensure designation debacle. It was really difficult in the No Child Left Behind era. ESSA lightened up a little bit, but we still have some kind of, you know, hangover from that. There's still some shadows that loom over us. But we have pre-service and in-service trainings that we want to really strengthen. Funding for all of the development stuff. Like I told you, the work is never done. There is no end to the amount of work that can be done. So funding to be able to pay people to participate in all of this. You know, I talked about we have team teachers in a classroom. You have 2 teachers because you want the people speaking to each other, you want them modeling the language to each other, not just monologuing one person at the kids. We want someone who can help document processes better. We want, you know, we have to train paraprofessionals for different tasks. There's a lot of stuff. Money is always needed. Parent support is, again, a challenge because the kids are learning at such a fast pace, and a lot of the parents don't have 40 and 50 hours a week to put into language learning. A lack of materials, and then a definition of, you know, a literacy continuum in Ojibwe language is a challenge. But we are renewing values. That was just a little story. My son said, "Mom, I never knew how hard it was for you guys. You know, I hear things now and I see things, and I didn't understand the violence and the threats and the negativity that you and our grandmas and grandpas got for doing this. You just let us be kids. We knew that we were coming to a place where grandmas and grandpas were at, and our language was being spoken, and we felt safe." And he said, "Thanks for doing that." Here's our Gachaya Amanananig, our elders, some of our elders who've worked with us through the years. One in the upper corner is still at the school, and then the others have passed on. They're no longer working with us, but they've been big supports over the years. They're champions, all of them. Parents helping out. Child labor, forced child labor, the kids cleaning up the schoolroom. But, you know, they can take that language home and teach it to their parents. So a lot of times we get asked and we talk about things like, well, you know, the cognitive and the social benefits of learning, of multilingualism, of learning another language or learning multiple languages. You know, all this great stuff happens in your brain and the neural networks are, you know, snap into it and they're formed better and you're better able to, your executive functions in your brain work better and, you know, for the multilingual person. And social benefits, like you're more open to other cultures and, you know, like why? I'm at this point now, like seriously, 20, 25 years in, man, y'all, why? Why is it not enough that we would speak Ojibwe, that we would speak our own language on our own land in our own space? Why do we have to justify it? Nobody goes into the school board meetings and says, oh yeah, well, what are the benefits of English? Nobody has asked that. Why are we constantly justifying this? So I'm tossing this out, you know, I'm throwing it away. I'm done with justifying it and saying, you know, the cognitive and the social benefits are so great and dancing in front of the tribal council and in front of the state board of education. I'm done. This is our right. We are on our land. We are in our site. We are under tribal regulatory authority. Our tribal leaders, our tribal community members say that Ojibwe language is one of the highest priorities for our communities. This is one way that we are going to enact this. So I'm just done with it. We're going to assert our rights as self-governing, sovereign citizens. Where do you want to hear Ojibwe? That's a whole big list of places. And we can come up with 7,000 more places, you know? Fixing the car, out ricing, gardening, fixing the fence, bathing your child, at ceremonies, at funerals, in court, when you're out gambling. I mean, just everywhere we want to hear it, right? What will it take? So we do these surveys, we do these census things in our community, and so some of the community responses were, I mean, we have to get down to like being very deliberate and being very intent. You know, everybody says, this is where I want to hear Ojibwe spoken. I want to hear it everywhere. And we say, what's it going to take? It's not enough to just dream it and talk about it. We have to put in a plan and do it. So what's it going to take, folks? And a lot of people are like, oh, don't make eye contact. You know, I don't want to do the work. Oh, you're asking me to do something. But I mean, this is really what we have to do. And so as second language learners who want to maintain our language and want to move ahead, we really have to press and we really have to be conscious and really do this. So, you know, I'm the badgerer in the community, you know, like just badgering people. Well, what's it going to take, you guys? Why do you think that way? Why do you think like that? Why does this motivate you? You know? So we had to like really talk about this. We're like, what's it going to take to bring Ojibwe into all that place? And it seems really simple, like, well, more speakers of Ojibwe. But I mean, we really had to have that conversation. It seems so obvious, but we had to say it out loud. And we're like, how do we get more speakers of Ojibwe? Does it just happen? No, it takes some work. No, we got to think about it more. So we need more opportunities. We need more access places in the community and more opportunities to learn Ojibwe on a really highly functioning level. And our community wants to see more intergenerational learning. We need to have multiple speakers modeling the language for the learners, not just one person monologuing. You know, we can't put all our weight on the one person in the community who learned it to a pretty good level. I mean, we need to build more speakers. And we need a sense of importance. Constant reflection, constant questioning. If our goal is a living Ojibwemoan, how do we know we're meeting the goal? We are constantly questioning. Have we set standards that make sense to us as Ojibwe Anishinaabe? Have we made our decisions as best we see them for our Leech Lake Nation? Gegetasa, Deboy and Damen. Yeah, we can look at that and we can answer ourselves and say that. Oh, I'm almost done. I see my timer is almost up. These were some student responses when asked to do a presentation. How does this help prepare you for life? And so the kids wrote this, and they were like, this was the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade class. So by 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, they had some English language arts and English reading introduced. So they're like, hey, teachers help with survival stuff. We learn how to listen, and our reading and math are getting us ready for life. This one was cool. Teaching me minno bima win. How to do the right thing, how to live a good life. Teaching me how to be a good person, and of course, reading and math. But the math is kind of harder, though, said that kid. You know, we'd probably learn that in the other school, too, but not Ojibwe and not survival skills. And some kid was like, I'm learning communication skills in Ojibwe. Like, what? I wasn't saying stuff like that about my English learning when I was in 4th or 5th grade. I wasn't thinking any of that. I did not have that kind of metacognition. Public school did not request that of me either. Oh, it's recorded. Hi, Cass Lake Bina Schools. So we asked the students, where do you speak Ojibwe? And so we asked these kids, like, you know, you're learning the language, where do you guys go? And they were like, one of them has several siblings. Everywhere I go with my family, my brothers and sisters. Another kid said, at school and at the sweat lodge. And someone said at home, at school, at my grandma's house, at powwows, at my dad's house, at school and at home, at school, at ceremonies and at home, powwows, and at school. Tawag. They're big kids, being busy, being kids. Policies. Did we, oh, you know what? This is interesting because we've heard a little bit about this too, the institutionalization of language. And this is something that a lot of us folks who run native language immersion schools or programs talk about, is that we start to see that without a strong enough community and family component, kids get really good at talking about academic content area subjects in Ojibwe. So do us second language learners. I taught at every level in the school at different times over the years, and I ended up, in the last few years I was there, doing Ojibwe language arts for 4th, 5th, and 6th grade students. But I taught at all the different levels, subbed classes and stuff. Well, let me tell you, I could do a really good math lesson in Ojibwe. I can talk about language arts lessons in Ojibwe really well, really fluidly and really smoothly. Our students can talk about it really well. But if we were out in the community, we would probably be a little clunky and a little halting with just basic, visiting and stuff, because that's kind of the pressure of a school and an institution like that. So it's super important that we are also creating really, really strong family and social supports. And I've heard this from my friends at Blackfeet. I've heard this from my friends in our relatives in Hawaii who are doing this. This is a concern for a lot of us, that we're not just raising up kids who can talk about academic content areas in our languages, but that we're constantly reflecting and figuring out how to improve practice and make sure that we are building a living language, not just an institutionalized language. There are several policies that support languages in the U.S., and we heard a little bit about that before I spoke. So I hope we're not putting you to sleep with our public policy talk. But Native American Languages Act of 1990, it is the policy of the United States that to preserve, protect, promote the rights of tribes to use their languages in all public proceedings, including educational institutions. The Esther Martinez Initiative amended that act in 2006, recognizing language survival schools and language nests that provide instruction in a school setting, primarily in the native language as the language of instruction. That came into law in 2006. We have official language policies at tribal government level all over the place, and I wouldn't even know how to begin collecting that. We have 580 some tribes here in the U.S. and how many First Nations, but I know in Minnesota, all 11 of our tribal nations have passed laws saying that our language is the official language of our nation. We have tribal constitutional reform movements where for our people, for our tribe, Ojibwe language is a very high priority. We have environmental, judicial, health, tax, education codes. So for our tribal government, we're taking regulatory authority in all of these spaces. And Ojibwe language has been a priority in all of those. The United States Education Law was reauthorized in 2016. So that's the Every Student Succeeds Act. That changed up some of the rights from Title III and moved them up into Title I, making them far more accessible, making our rights to use our languages in educational settings far more accessible and removing some of the barriers. I participated in negotiated rulemaking to the U.S. Ed Department on assessments when that new law came in. And so we've got some new recognition of Native American language schools and programs and our rights in there, which had previously been overlooked. Because there are so few Native language immersion sites in the U.S. at this point in time, but we are seeing more and more tribes, more and more communities want to start them up. So we are slowly increasing our rights and our recognitions, our civil rights, our human rights, and getting those enshrined into laws. In 2014, a group of us formed the NCNALSP. It doesn't spell anything. It stands for National Coalition of Native American Language Schools and Programs. It's an advocacy organization that advocates for. And every one of these words is, again, intently used, intently defined, national in scope. So we're dealing with U.S. federal laws. Coalition is a group of us coming together. Native American language is defined in federal law in places. That includes all of our Native American languages, Alaska Native, and Hawaiian Native languages. So we use that as an all-encompassing tool, so we don't have to redefine it, so we can refer to other laws already in place under U.S. Congress. Language schools and programs. Some of our language immersion sites are independent, standalone schools, but many do not have the capacity to do that. So some of them are programs within an existing site. They may partner with a public school, they may partner with a Bureau of Indian Ed school, they may be a private tribally run school or program within another school. So we wanted to include everyone. We started this in 2014, though, to advocate for schools that use Native American languages as the primary language of instruction, because nobody else was advocating for us. All of the larger civil rights organizations, larger Indian education organizations were just kind of ignoring what was going on in language schools and programs, and they were like, no, keep quiet. You got to do those English tests at third grade. And we were like, no, it's unfair. It's actually violent. If you ever came into our site and sat the kids down and watched them struggle through this test that's not in a language that they've ever been taught in, you would see the violence in that. No, we're not going to stand up for that, and we're not going to be quiet. And so there were other rights that go along with running a language immersion school and program that were not being supported. So you can find us on the web at ncnalsp.org or on Facebook, if you haven't already. National Coalition of Native American Language Schools and Programs. But that too, all of those, each one of those words intently chosen. So I gave you guys the idyllic immersion school setting, you know. I gave you the really shiny and glossy parts. I described that from 2004. And then, you know, looking at it today, how many years later, it's a struggle always to build new teachers, to maintain capacity, to maintain space and funding. Master apprentice models in 2000 to 2003, and then today. It's tougher to think about today because from 2000 till now, that's a really long time, we've lost almost all of our speakers at home in Leech Lake. We have like a handful of people. We used to have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. So it's been really difficult to do this, and we're realizing that we have second language learners now as our master speakers in a lot of these places. And we have to think about, what does that mean? Is that changing? How is that changing our language? And what does it mean that we are now with this second wave of language revitalization where second language speakers are the masters? And we have to be able to accept that our language is going to change and that our domains are going to change and that this is where we're at. But the other thing is, just a reminder, don't freak out that we only have second language learners left in some of our communities, because you know what? They're raising a new generation of first language speakers. We're going to get it back. Right there, those kids are first speakers of our language. Miigwech Bizindameg.